What's up, everybody? My name is Scott Paddock, and today I'm going to give you some easy tips for learning hard music. What's the best strategy for learning a hard piece of music is a question that I get asked all of the time. So in this tutorial, I'm going to break it down step by step, the easiest way to figure out a hard piece of music or a hard phrase in your music. Now, something that could be hard is completely dependent on what level you are. If you're a beginner, just playing your high notes could be hard. If you're early intermediate, playing a triplet phrase could be hard. If you're advanced, playing some really tough fingerings or some hard chord changes could be tough. So by using this strategy, it will help whatever is difficult for you. Before we start with the tutorial, if you enjoy my content on YouTube, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to my channel, give me a thumbs up, and leave me a comment. Let's talk about step number one for learning hard music. It is really easy. Grab your pencil. You need to write in your music. It's super important to write in your music, whether you're writing in a rhythm, the counting for a rhythm, or you're circling the hard note, or you're making a note for yourself to remind yourself what you need to do to play this section correct when you get there when you're playing the piece of music. Write in your music. That's your first step. For this tutorial, I wrote a phrase that has a lot of the problems that people struggle with. So I'm going to start off just by playing the phrase. So this has a lot of tricky stuff in it, even though it's a short phrase. So the first thing that I would do if I were playing this and I were having trouble with it is I would slow it down. And when I say slow it down, I mean slow it way down. If you can't play it at that tempo, go slower. Keep slowing it down until you find a tempo that you are really comfortable with. This is a big problem that I run into when I'm teaching private lessons, is when I say slow it down, they slow it down just a little bit and they keep making the same mistakes. The absolute worst thing that you can do when you are trying to learn music is play it wrong several times in a row. When you do that, you're reinforcing playing it wrong. You're actually practicing playing it wrong. So if you play it wrong 10 times and you play it right 2 or 3 times, you actually practiced playing it wrong because you played it wrong way more than you played it right. So slow it down and don't play it wrong a bunch of times in a row. Now, if even at a slow tempo you can't play it, then we need to go to the next step, which is break it down into smaller bits, so smaller phrases. So this phrase starts off with some triplets and lands on some eighth notes. So that would be my first phrase if I was going to break this down. So I'd want to make sure I was landing on that C sharp eighth note. So I might even take my pencil and write an arrow down on that C sharp, letting me know that that's the land point from these triplets. So I would practice this 5 or 10 times. And gradually get faster, and it might take you a couple days to get really comfortable with it. You might not be able to get super comfortable with it and play it perfect in the first day or even the first week of working on it. From there, I would play the next phrase, and the next phrase starts on the C sharp. That's a fairly easy phrase, but we have those 16th notes in there, so I might practice those 16th notes a little bit extra. I'd make sure that I know that they're coming in on the and of 4. That's another thing. When you're struggling with rhythms, instead of trying to hear it, you want to make sure that you're counting out the rhythms and not just kind of guessing at it. So those 16th notes come in on the and of 4. That B flat comes in on the and of 4. So I'd break it down into an even smaller phrase to get those 16th notes sounding really good and really clean. Then I would go back to the beginning of this phrase, the C sharp. And I'm just playing it over and over, but I'm doing it very deliberately and I'm making sure that I play everything correct. Now, what you might have noticed is when I played that triplet line, I stopped on the C sharp. And the reason I stopped on that C sharp is because that's the next part of the phrase. I want to connect these phrases. I don't want to just practice the triplets and then practice the next eighth note with the 16th notes. I don't want to practice those separately. I want to connect them by ending on the C sharp and starting on the C sharp. So always connect your phrase. That's going to make it a lot easier to put everything together once you join everything, once you join all the phrases. So once I have these first two phrases down, I'm going to start at the beginning and play them together. And then I'd play it several times. If I couldn't play it at that tempo, I would slow it down. And I would just keep working on it until it became really smooth. I wouldn't really move on to the second part of this phrase until I had the first part down pretty good. Once I get that down pretty good, then I'll move on to the next part, which is the harder part because it has the 16th notes and it has some tough fingering. In my sax school, the Scott Paddock Sax School, I use these strategies for breaking down music and breaking down phrases all over the place. When I am presenting material, oftentimes the play along will be breaking down the hard sections, and I'll tell you exactly what to look for, exactly how to do it, how to practice it, and we'll practice it together doing play alongs. So if you want to add some structure to your practice routine and take the guesswork out of what to practice, how to practice it, and what to practice next, I'd like to invite you to check out the Scott Paddock Sax School. So if I look at these 16th notes, I know that my biggest problem is going to be just playing it up to tempo. So again, the first thing I'm going to do is slow it down. So at that tempo, it's a lot more manageable, but I'm going to do something else that's going to make it even easier. And that is I'm going to break it down even further and do it one beat at a time. So I'm going to start on beat 3. I'm going to skip those pickup notes, the C sharp and the E for right now. I'm going to start on beat 3 and end on the B flat. So I'm going to start on the G sharp. Now for that B flat, I need to figure out how I'm going to finger it. Am I going to finger it with a bis B flat or A with the side key? Because I'm jumping to it, I'm going to finger it with a bis B flat. So I might write bis in my music if I go back and forth between the two B flats. That way I'm not thinking about which B flat to use. I already know that I'm going to use the bis there. If you only use bis, obviously you wouldn't need to write bis in your music. So once I have this phrase down, then I would go back and add in the pickup notes. So I don't usually start on the pickup notes. I usually start on a full beat and then put the pickup notes on them. Now that I've got that, I'm going to add the next beat. So I'm going to start on B flat on beat 4. Notice I went all the way to the F sharp because I'm going to connect the phrase. Now, once I get that down, I'm going to connect the whole phrase. Now, another thing that you can do to break it down even further is if you're really struggling with the notes, just add one at a time. So for this example, I'm going to start with the B flat. I'm just going to add the B flat. Once I've got that, then I'm just going to add the A. That's it. That sounds a little weird on its own because it's a passing tone. So I'm going to go ahead and add the G sharp. One more time. Then I'm going to jump to the B. One more time. When we broke down this phrase, break it down is something I say all of the time. When we broke down this phrase, we did it with the first half and the second half. Now we are going to connect the two. It's a lot easier to do it like that. When you break things down into sections that make sense, it's way easier to connect them. Whereas if I just stopped at the end of the measure, if I stop there, it feels weird, it sounds weird, and then if I had to start the next phrase, it's just kind of awkward because the G sharp A belongs to the first part of the phrase, and then the 16th notes are the second part of the phrase. So when you're breaking this down, you want to do it in segments that make sense. Now, another thing that I have done when I'm really struggling with the notes with something, if I can't get it down and I'm really struggling with it, sometimes I'll play those 3 or 4 notes backwards. It just kind of makes my brain think of it in a different way, and a lot of times it'll fix the fingering problem. So if I was struggling with beat 4, the 16th notes with the B flat, I would start on the B natural, the last note, and go backwards. Then forwards, backwards, forwards, Just by doing that, it gives you a different way of looking at those notes, and it lets your brain process them in a different way and see them going forwards and backwards. And oftentimes it'll help you figure out the notes in that phrase and play it a lot cleaner. So when it comes to learning a hard piece of music or a hard phrase, break it down. That's the best advice I can give you. Break it down into smaller pieces. Be really deliberate about what you're playing. Don't play it wrong a bunch of times. Slow it down, break it down so that you're playing everything correct. And then once you've got it down, connect the phrases again and then gradually speed up. Now, just because you can play it at a slow tempo, that doesn't mean you're going to be able to play it at a fast tempo really quickly. That could take a while. It could take you a couple days or even a couple weeks depending on what you're working on. So everything is a process. Take your time, but be very deliberate with what you play, and of course, break it down. Thanks for taking the time to check out this tutorial. If you found it helpful, I'd like to invite you to check out the Scott Paddock Sax School. In the Sax School, I have everything broken down step by step, super easy to follow. So if you're looking for some structure in your practice routine, check out the Scott Paddock Sax School. Thanks a lot.